The interview was over. The cameras were off. Oprah Winfrey stood up, smoothed her jacket, and shook Tina Turner's hand across the narrow space between their chairs. She said the polite things. She said it had been an extraordinary conversation. She thanked Tina Turner for her time and her honesty. She turned and walked toward the studio door. She stopped. She stood there for a moment with her back to the room, to the crew beginning to pack up their cables, to the producer reviewing his notes on a clipboard, to Tina Turner still seated quietly in the chair across the set. Then Oprah Winfrey turned around. And what happened in the next 4 minutes was something the cameras had already missed. To understand what Oprah Winfrey could not bring herself to ask under the studio lights, you have to understand what both of these women represented to the world in 1997, and what they represented to each other. The Oprah Winfrey Show was, by the late 1990s, the most watched daytime program in the history of American television. More than 22 million people tuned in every day. Oprah had built her platform on a specific and radical idea that the most private human experiences, the ones people carried in silence, the ones that shame made unspeakable, were the ones most worth examining in public. She had sat across from survivors of abuse, from people wrestling with addiction, from public figures who had lost everything. She had asked them the questions that other interviewers circled around. She was not a woman who avoided difficult rooms. She had walked into more difficult rooms with more difficult questions than almost anyone in the history of her medium. And Tina Turner, by 1997, occupied a particular position in the world's imagination. She was 67 years old. She was living in Küsnacht, Switzerland, with Erwin Bach, the man who had, in the quiet language of her private life, given her something she had not previously believed was available to her. Her Wildest Dreams World Tour had ended the year before, having sold out arenas across Europe and North America for nearly 2 years. She had become, in her 6th decade, one of the most commercially successful touring artists on the planet. She had also become something harder to name, a symbol for millions of people, mostly women, of the distance that can exist between where a life begins and where it is capable of arriving. Oprah Winfrey had spent years watching Tina Turner from the particular angle available to someone who understood, at a level below the professional, what it meant to survive something designed to diminish you. She had prepared for this interview with unusual care. She had spent 3 days with her notes. She had written questions and discarded them and written them again. There was one question at the center of everything she wanted to understand. She had written it on a single line, by itself, at the bottom of the last page of her notes. She had read it back to herself the morning of the interview, and then, under the studio lights, with the cameras rolling and Tina Turner sitting across from her in that particular composed stillness, she had asked everything else. The interview itself was, by every professional measure, exceptional. Tina Turner spoke about the early years in Nutbush, Tennessee. She spoke about the music, about what it felt like, physically, to perform at the level she had sustained for 4 decades. She spoke about Europe and the life she had built there. She spoke about Erwin Bach with a careful and private warmth. She laughed at one point with a fullness that made the studio crew stop what they were doing and look up. And Oprah guided all of it with the skill of someone who had spent decades earning the trust of people sitting in that chair. But each time the conversation moved toward the edge of the question she had written alone at her desk, each time it came close enough that she could feel it, she turned the conversation slightly elsewhere. She asked the next question on her list. Because the question she had written down was not a journalist's question. It was a personal one. And Oprah Winfrey, who had built her career on erasing the distance between the personal and the public, had, in the presence of this particular woman on this particular evening, found that distance impossible to cross. The question she had not asked was this: how do you forgive yourself for the years you stayed? Not how do you forgive him. That question had been asked 100 times, and Tina Turner had answered it with the grace of a woman who had genuinely arrived somewhere on the other side of it. But this other question carried a different kind of weight. The weight of the mornings you stayed, the weight of the decisions made inside conditions no one outside them could fully see. The quiet, persistent question of what your own choices say about you. Oprah had not asked it because she was afraid. Not afraid for Tina Turner. Afraid for herself. She stood at the studio door for perhaps 4 seconds. The producer looked up from his clipboard. One of the camera operators paused with a cable in his hand. Then Oprah Winfrey turned back. She walked across the set, past the cooling lights, past the crew who watched her without speaking, and she sat back down in the chair across from Tina Turner. Tina Turner had not moved. She watched Oprah come back across the room. She did not look surprised. She simply waited. Oprah folded her hands in her lap. She looked at Tina Turner directly, and she said, "There's a question I didn't ask you." Tina Turner said, "I know." There was a silence between them then, the particular kind of silence that forms when two people who have spent their lives performing composure are briefly allowed, in a room that has stopped watching, to set it down. Oprah asked her question. The crew did not move. The producer had stopped writing. Tina Turner looked at her hands for a long moment. Then she looked up. And she said something that Oprah would describe, in the years that followed, as one of the most honest things she had ever heard said aloud in a room. She said that forgiving yourself was not a single decision. It was not a morning you woke up and chose. It was something that happened in pieces, in small, ordinary moments spread across years. Making breakfast, walking to a window, hearing a song on the radio that you once knew in an entirely different life, in a version of yourself you no longer recognized. She said there were still mornings when the weight of it returned. Not the anger, not the grief, just a quiet, simple question. How? How did those years happen? How did she remain inside them as long as she did? And she said, and this was the moment Oprah reached forward and placed her hand over Tina Turner's hand, that she had arrived, after a very long time, at something she had not expected to find. She said she had come to understand that the woman who stayed was not a weaker version of the woman who left. She was the same woman, operating inside conditions that had been deliberately and systematically built to make leaving feel impossible, and that forgiving yourself begins not with a decision, but with a recognition. The recognition that surviving something is not the same as consenting to it. That remaining inside a situation you did not have the resources to leave is not a character failure. It is what human beings do when the architecture of their circumstances has been designed to hold them. Oprah did not speak for a moment. She kept her hand over Tina Turner's hand. Then she said quietly, "I needed to hear that." Tina Turner looked at her and said, "I know." What passed between those two women in that cooling studio, in those 4 unrecorded minutes after the professional obligations of the evening had been fulfilled, was not broadcast. It was not part of the edited interview that aired. It belonged to the room and the people in it. But what it represented was something both of these women understood, in their different ways, with the precision that comes from having lived it. Oprah Winfrey had built her life's work on the belief that the questions we cannot ask in public are often the ones that matter most in private. And yet she had sat across from one of the most extraordinary women of the 20th century with a question she had written alone at her desk 3 days earlier, and she had not been able to ask it. Because some questions are not professional questions. Some questions belong to the part of us that is not performing, the part that recognizes, across the narrow distance between two chairs, something it has been carrying in private for a very long time. In the years that followed, Oprah spoke about Tina Turner with a specificity different from how she spoke about most subjects. Not about the records or the stadiums, about the woman. About what it meant to watch someone build a life, a real, chosen life, on the far side of everything that had been done to diminish them. She said once that there were a small number of answers across all the years and all the conversations that she returned to, in the ordinary moments, making breakfast, walking to a window. What Tina Turner had said to her in those 4 quiet minutes after the cameras went dark was one of them. 2 women. One question held back all evening under studio lights. 4 minutes in a room that had stopped being a set and become, briefly, something more honest. Some of the most important things we are ever told come to us in the conversations we almost don't have. The ones we walk toward the door and away from. The ones that require us to stop, to turn back, to sit down again. Oprah Winfrey turned back. And Tina Turner, who had spent a lifetime giving people exactly what they needed in exactly the moment they needed it, was still there, waiting. She always was. If this story moved you, subscribe to this channel. Every week we find the moments that history almost forgot, the questions asked after the lights go down, the answers that stay with us for the rest of our lives. Leave a comment below. Is there a question you have been carrying, one you have walked toward and away from, that you have not yet found the courage to ask? Share this video with someone who needs to hear it today. We will see you in the next story.